from a major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley, 3M, Medtronic, all of those. We understand healthcare. It's why we're ranked first on affordability and accessibility and quality of healthcare. And so what I know is under Kamala Harris, more people are covered than they have before. And those of you listening, this is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants to go back and remember this. He ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to repeal Obamacare. On day one, he tried to sign an executive order to repeal the ACA. He signed on to a lawsuit to repeal the ACA, but lost at the Supreme Court. And he would have repealed the ACA had it not been for the courage of John McCain to save that bill. Now, fast forward, what that means to you is you lose your pre-existing conditions. If you're sitting at home and you got asthma, too bad. If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot during football, might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26. Kamala Harris negotiated drug prices for the first time with Medicare. We have 10 drugs that will come online, the most common ones that'll be there. But look, this issue, and when Donald Trump said, I've got a concept of a plan, it cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never given me that. But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept, because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more? So what they're going to do is let insurance companies pick who they insure, because guess what happens? You pay your premium, it's not much. They're figure they're not going to have to pay out to you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it. That's why the system didn't work. Kamala Harris will protect and enhance the ACA.
Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, and gender nonconforming individuals. I had to go live. I know it's midnight and a lot of people are already going to sleep. You got to work in the morning, but I just had to give kudos to Tim Walz. I don't think I've seen a comeback like this ever in political debate history. And I really want to talk about some of the key details, and we'll play a lot of clips. I have all the clips. Shout out to Aaron Rupert for doing all the hard work of producing for everybody. He's the one who made the clips possible. They counted Tim Walz out. By they, I mean all of MAGA, from JD Vance on stage, who had this real smug, demeanor. He knew he was winning. And in fact, let's keep it 100. In the first half, Tim Walz was losing. And we can go into details as to why, but it was a little difficult to watch for the first few minutes of this debate, actually for the first half. If we talk about this in football parlance, he was down. And it was after halftime that Coach got himself together. He composed himself and he looked for a moment. And that moment provided itself in two different places, but primarily around January 6th. The fact that JD Vance could not admit that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election is, quite frankly, all we're going to remember from it. How what Tim Walz called a damning non-answer. Let's start with that clip.
He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further.
No, that's all we're going to remember from this debate, because it's the big lie. It's 100% what is driving MAGA right now. MAGA stands on what they believe to be a firm foundation, but it's a lie. And JD Vance couldn't bring himself to tell the truth in this moment. Why? Because if he told the truth, Donald Trump would replace him. It doesn't matter how close we are to the election. It doesn't matter. Donald Trump's ego is what's preeminent. That's all that matters. And Tim Walz unpacked that immediately afterwards, saying that there's not going to be a firewall. If JD Vance doesn't have the temerity, I'll put it like that, to stand up to Donald Trump around something as obvious as the fact that he lost the 2020 election, then JD Vance is not going to have the nerve to stand up to Donald Trump when he orders the troops to open fire on American citizens that are protesting. JD Vance was polished. JD Vance was quite honestly a prolific and an excellent liar. He told so many lies that when he was finally fact checked, he actually kind of lost his composure. I'll get to that clip in a moment. But what JD Vance could not handle was a very direct, straightforward question, and Tim Walz delivered it brilliantly. I really hope Coach can see this, because I was in the background behind my computer screen, and I was just chanting, "Coach, Coach," because I knew that there was a chance for him to get back into the fight. JD Vance presented so well, so polished. He really does come off as a person who had a professional career as a publicist, as a PR relations expert, someone who didn't really go into battle, but stood behind a camera with a pen and took notes. He came off as polished as someone who wears eyeliner. He came off as a prolific professional politician, and I think that's where he mistook. I think that's where they took Tim Walz for granted. JD Vance, along with so many maggots on Twitter, they took for granted the common Joe, the common man nature of Tim Walz. Tim Walz was patient. Tim Walz was trying to be he had that Minnesota what's the word I'm looking for? Congeniality. I think that's the word. I might have that wrong, but he was kind. He had that kindness, and he apologized for interrupting when he wasn't the one interrupting. And JD Vance thought that he could steamroll all over Tim Walz. And for the first half of the night, he did, folks. He did. And this really speaks to a problem in American politics. I saw one of my friends on Twitter mention this. He said people are so impressed with the fact that JD Vance can lie prolifically, right? He lies with a smile. He lies with honestly, he weaves together his lies so well that it's almost hard to find a place to really debunk the lies. But Tim Walz nailed him. I just have to play this one clip over again, because here's the fundamental question to ask anyone who aligns with Donald Trump. Did he lose in 2020?
He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
Has she?
It's
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship.
To this censorship thing, I have to talk about this, and I'll do it really briefly because I know you want to see more clips. But they want to have the right to lie. And this is what he's standing on. JD Vance was standing 10 toes deep on having the right to lie to Americans, and considers that if we censor, or rather if we take away this open-ended right to lie and to spread misinformation. Twitter is a misinformation machine. MAGA is a misinformation machine. If we make policies that makes it either more difficult or make it illegal to spread misinformation, they crumble. And this is what he's standing on in the face of being asked about the big lie. The very best that JD Vance could do was to come back and talk about censorship. They refuse. The kryptonite for MAGA is the truth, as evidenced by this next clip when JD Vance literally, now this is where JD Vance really didn't show a level of sophistication. This really shows a level of childishness, because he could not handle the fact that he was mildly fact-checked by the moderators. Listen in.
Just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status.
Right.
temporary protected
Well,
status.
Margaret,
Nora?
but
Thank you.
Senator, we have so much to get to.
Margaret,
Thank you,
I think it's
Nora.
important
We're
because
gonna turn out of the
debate-
economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
the rules were that
The
you guys weren't
economy,
going to
we're-
fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on.
The
So there's
rules
an
were-
application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That
Thank
is
you,
the
Senator.
facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by
Thank
our
you,
own
Senator, for
leadership.
describing
Coach was
the
ready to
legal
get in there.
process.
Those laws-
We
and
have
Kamala
so much
Harris
to get
opened up
to,
that
Senator.
pathway.
We
Those
have
laws
so
have been on
much.
the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The
we
CBP
want to
One
have,
app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because
That moment right there really tells you what these people are all about. They cannot stand in an environment where truth prevails. They cannot stand in an environment where fact checking, objective truths can reign. They can't. They've created the perfect environment for lies and misinformation, and that's because that's where they thrive. And if you take them out of that environment, they fall apart, because how dare you? I mean, Megyn Kelly was on Twitter. I wish I had it on my screen right now. Megyn Kelly said, "F you, CBS. How dare you fact check?" I'm like, really, Megyn Kelly? You're ostensibly a journalist. You're that enraged by the fact that journalists did what journalists do, or at least they're supposed to do, which is to get the truth out there, to fact check liars. Understand, the foundation of MAGA is lies. They have nothing without lies. So we already went through a couple. We went through the damning non-answer. They could not answer. JD Vance could not answer. And this is what's so important about that particular moment. While JD Vance, in terms of just the horse race, right? If we look at this as a scorecard, who had better moments, who had separate the truth, right? Separate truth from everything else. Because if you look at it from a perspective of truth, Tim Walz won the entire night. One of Tim Walz's problem is that, and I hate to say this as a pastor, I hate to say this, but one of his problems is that he's entirely too truthful and not combative enough. If he had been willing to lie like JD Vance, he probably could have had a better night. You saw this when they asked him about the Tiananmen Square untruth lie. Tim Walz, he lied about that. And he was uncomfortable just even admitting that was something that he fudged. Right? He's not a good liar. Tim Walz is not a good liar. JD Vance is a professional liar. He can lie to you with a straight face, with all the eyeliner and everything else. He will lie to you with his hands doing exactly what my hand is doing right now. He will lie to you standing tall, 10 toes flat. He will lie to you and make you think that he's telling the truth. Tim Walz doesn't have that skill set. And I think what a lot of people in America failed to do, or maybe we're at a threshold, I don't know, you tell me in the audience. I think a lot of people don't count up the lies, and they just look at the scorecard and say who had a better night, a better performance. And if we look at it through that lens, by all means, the entire first half was JD Vance's. Oh, but the second half came, and Coach got JD Vance on the ropes, and it didn't take, he didn't have, if it was a scorecard, he didn't land a lot of punches. He did not land a lot of punches, but Tim Walz threw some haymakers, particularly around January 6th, especially around the Affordable Care Act, around even this moment. Let me skip to this moment, because JD Vance and MAGA tries to present themselves as these moral figures, and Tim Walz had a moment where his faith came out seamlessly and in the exact right spot where it's supposed to. JD Vance couldn't even handle that, because I'm sure JD Vance probably doesn't even have a scripture that he wants to quote, even though he parades around like he's some moral evangelical. Listen.
My faith a lot. But Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it. This bill does it. It's funded. It's supported by the people who do it. And it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you.
One more time, because I was
talk about
busy
my faith a
doing comments.
lot. But Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us you do unto
That's
me.
it.
I think that's true of most Americans. They
That's right.
simply want order to it. This bill
That's
does
the
it.
context.
It's
The
funded.
context.
It's supported by the people who do it, and it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
That's it. He used it in context of the migrants. He used it so brilliantly because that's exactly, as a Christian, that is one of the number one mandates that we have, is to treat immigrants properly, to treat immigrants like our neighbors, to treat them like we would treat ourselves. The Bible is very clear about that. And so for Tim Walz to let that flow out of him very seamlessly in that moment was an authentic moment. And someone else said something in the chat room, and I want to find that. They said, essentially, I can't find it, that Tim Walz came off as a normal guy. I think Republicans are underestimating that, and I'll be interested in seeing how the polls look after this, because Tim Walz, first of all, Tim Walz knows the issues. I was listening to him and he was communicating the issues. He didn't communicate them like at an A+ level. I give him like a B- in terms of conveying, but I heard it there. And I heard the complexities that he was trying to convey, especially around the Affordable Care Act, around economic issues, but he conveyed them very, pretty effectively. He knows the issues, and he still manages to be a normal human being that might get a little shy behind the bright lights. I understand that. I understand not everybody is as polished as JD Vance, who has spent most of his life behind the limelight. He's been a conservative darling. He's been a conservative star. Tim Walz grew up the hard way. Tim Walz had actual careers. Tim Walz had actual jobs. He comes off as a normal human being. And I think an average Joe, if there is such a thing, sits at home and sees Tim Walz and be like, they see themselves in him. And I'm talking about the average Joe. I'm gonna keep it 100. I'm talking about like average white guys. Just your average union kind of white dude who's sitting at home and happened to turn on the TV to watch this debate. They recognize themselves more in Tim Walz than they do JD Vance with all of JD Vance's eyeliner. Listen, I ain't hating on JD Vance. Extremely professional liar of the highest order. No wonder they wanted him to be the VP pick. He is excellent at this. He's an excellent politician for 2024. But you know where his Achilles heel was? The simple truth. The simple truth. And he couldn't answer the simple truth. I want to play another clip because I thought this is really where Tim Walz, I think, shined. He shined in the conversation about the individual mandates around the Affordable Care Act. I wish he would have gone a little bit further, but he did an excellent job unpacking and debunking JD Vance in real time when JD Vance thought he had a got you moment around the individual mandates, which is the reason why the Affordable Care Act fell underneath its own pressure, was because Republicans spent all of Donald Trump's term taking apart piece by piece and ensuring, first of all, the individual mandate was ruled unconstitutional. Take a listen into this exchange.
I think the idea of making sure
enrollment under the Affordable Care Act go up under the Trump administration?
it's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it. The system works. And the question about this of young people, or whatever, that's the individual mandate piece of this. And Republicans fought tooth and nail saying, well, Americans should be free to do this. Well, then what happens is... So you think
the individual mandate's a good idea?
You shrink. I think the idea of making sure the risk pool is broad enough to cover everyone, that's the only way insurance works. When it doesn't, it collapses. You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out. Look, people know that they need to be on health care. People expect it to be there. And when we are able to make it, and we are making it this way, when we incentivize people to be in the market, when we help people who might not be able to afford it get there, and we make sure then when you get sick and old, it's there for you. Because I heard people.
That's it. But what's so good about this moment, though, is that it shows that, number one, Tim Walz knows his stuff. He knows his stuff. That matters, right? That matters because it's not just that we should be forgiving for his inability to tell and express his knowledge at the level that he understands these issues, right? I think that's important. I think we should look at the fact that Tim Walz understands his stuff, but he might not have delivered it as prolifically as we would have liked. He does not deliver as well as JD Vance, right? But the way he dismantled JD Vance's attempt at a got you moment, and he says, I believe, to JD Vance is like, oh, you believe you support an individual mandate? Now, me being the petty person I am, say yes. Yes, and you should never have gotten rid of it in the first place because that was your strategy to destroy the Affordable Care Act and make it unaffordable. It's not affordable anymore because you got rid of the individual mandate. That's me. I would have been petty. But Tim Walz did it a little more professionally, a lot more professionally. He says, I believe that we should broaden the risk pool. Yes, absolutely. And so there's going to be a lot said. I saw Bill Ackman, the billionaire who went after the president at Harvard University, only to expose that his wife was a plagiarist. He accused the president at Harvard for being the black woman at Harvard for being the plagiarist. Turns out his wife was a plagiarist. Not that that matters, but what I loved tonight was that he tried to throw off on Tim Walz as being kind of a buffoon, kind of an oaf, kind of out of his league. But the truth of the matter is he's not out of his league. It's just we have created a cesspool for politicians who can speak well. Okay, no, we haven't, because Donald Trump is at the top of it and he's a moron, but still, there is a place and a lane in American politics for people who can lie proficiently. That's who JD Vance is. And so JD Vance, along with all the conservatives, were dismissing Tim Walz, dismissing his ability to have a moment. And the most impactful moment, again, came around January 6th. January 6th, as well as the fact that JD Vance could not admit that Donald Trump lost the election. It's simple moments like that that people are going to remember more than the fact that, you know, at the beginning of the very first question, the most ridiculous question, asking Tim Walz about whether or not Israel has a right to have a preemptive strike. Not going to lie, coach, you look like a deer in headlights. That's fine. People aren't going to remember that. People are absolutely going to remember this moment.
He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further.
I want to play another clip here. This is something else that I really appreciated that Tim Walz did. Tim Walz took the words out of JD Vance's mouth and really enumerated one by one all of the people that MAGA is telling you that you shouldn't listen to, people that you should ignore. And I think it's worthwhile hearing that.
And the same thing goes with this. And I ask you, economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing goes with this. And I ask you out there, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, or whatever, how is it fair that you're paying your taxes every year and Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the last 15 years, and the last year as president? That's what's wrong with the system. There's a way around it, and he's bragged about that. We're just asking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
You have a minute.
Governor, you say trust the...
But pause. That second moderator, what's her name? I forgot her name. Oh my gosh, she was so sick. coughing everywhere. I fear that everyone in that studio is going to have to get tested for COVID, but I digress. We'll listen to the rest.
The experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing.
Here's the irony about that part, right? Now, I'm not going to rewrite history, but let's keep it 100. In the 90s, when they started so-called free trade and they started offshoring jobs, that was driven by Wall Street, that was driven by capitalism, that was driven by Republicans, and that was driven by neoliberal Democrats. One thing conservatives are really good at doing is creating a problem and putting enough distance between the fact that they created the problem and then come around and say that they are the solution. That's what happened with the Affordable Care Act. Hell, that's what happened with Iran. I mean, we're going to keep it 100. And I didn't get this clip, but Tim Walz pointed it out, and I just wish he had called out the name of it. It was the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA. We had a plan to bring Iran from the outskirts, from being a pariah nation to being included into the international order. And the plan that was negotiated by John Kerry underneath Barack Obama, we had a plan that would have halted or at least put off by 10 years, 10 full years, their nuclear program. We had that in place, and Donald Trump undid that plan. He reneged on that deal. That's why we have now, there's another reason we have what we had today. I'll go into that in another episode. I'm going to keep it nice and friendly for a minute here. There's another reason we are where we are today with Iran striking Israel. But one of the core reasons, one of the starting premises, one of the starting causes was because Donald Trump reneged on the plan that we had in place, that by now Iran would have been much closer to being an ally of the United States than it is right now an enemy of the United States. We are where we are because of the decisions that Donald Trump made. And this is what Republicans do. This is what conservatives do. They create an issue, they create a problem, and then they put enough distance between themselves and the fact that they created the problem in the first place, and then they represent themselves to America as if they're the solution. That's what they did with the Affordable Care Act. That's what we're dealing with Iran right now. That said, let's listen to the exchange. I don't even know the details of this exact exchange, but it's on the Affordable Care Act. Let's listen in.
But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept, because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more? So what they're going to do is let insurance companies pick who they insure, because guess what happens? You pay your premium, it's not much. They figure they're not going to have to pay out to you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it. That's why the system didn't work. Kamala Harris will protect and enhance the ACA.
That clip speaks for itself. I don't really have to go. I'm gonna answer this. Let's go to audience comments and let's take them down a little bit. I want to put them up just enough so folks know I'm talking about that stuff, right? Let's see. Do I want that? Well, look, it doesn't matter. Trump is not in the White House. Oh, my beloved, intentionally obtuse friend. I'm not going to call you dumb. I'm going to call you intentionally obtuse. Here's why I call you intentionally obtuse. Ramifications last longer than an administration. And if you can't admit that, if you don't know that, you don't belong in any conversation about politics. If you can't admit that, then you're a bad faith actor. The decisions that were made by Donald Trump are impacting us right now. We're still living in COVID-19. Yes, listen, I got plenty of beef with the way Biden handled COVID-19, but the reason we are where we are right now is because that moron, Donald Trump, thought that he can wash away COVID-19 with bleach and that it was all going to magically go away. We're living in the ramifications of Donald Trump right now. We're living in the ramifications of Donald Trump as it pertains to Iran right now. We're living in the aftermath of Donald Trump's economy. We're living in the aftermath. There's always not only a delay, but there's lingering effects. And you know this, y'all know this, but y'all like to play stupid.
Being an old guy.
Y'all like to play dumb because without your ability to be intentionally obtuse, you would have nothing. If America was actually acting in good faith, if we were actually abiding by facts, well, hell, we would have arrested climate change by now, but instead we're headlong into complete and total disaster. We're living with a list and a series of calamities because we live in a world where people make up. Trump's not in the White House right now. How long do you think the impacts of tax cuts last? Damn it, we're still living in Ronald Reagan's tax cuts of 1981, Ross Kemp's tax cut. I can't even say it that much. The 1981 Ross Kemp tax cuts set the framework for neoliberal economic policies that we're living under right now. Ronald Reagan's dead and gone, and we're still living in the universe, in the world that he created. But MAGA has to be intentionally obtuse. They have to lie. They have to use misinformation because without it, they have nothing. And now they've created an entire generation of people who crave it. What we're dealing with and the level of misinformation right now, why JD Vance was more concerned with Kamala and liberals who are talking about outlawing misinformation. The reason they're more concerned, JD Vance was more concerned with that, is because without misinformation, there is no MAGA. Without lies, there is no MAGA. You might have some conservatism. There's some conservatism that would survive, right? But you wouldn't have a Ted Cruz. You wouldn't have a Jim Jordan. You wouldn't have the entire list of rank and file Republicans who are in power right now because they exist as a result of intentional obtuseness and lies. Donald Trump's not in the White House. You have to be as dumb as that for Donald Trump to be where he is right now. For America, for Donald Trump to still be within 10 points of Kamala Harris, it's because we have a litany of Americans who are intentionally obtuse. I'm not saying your IQ is low. I'm not saying that you're dumb. I'm not saying that you're stupid. I'm saying that you are on purpose muddying the waters. You are on purpose distorting reality and on purpose trying to deny the impact that a president has long after his term. We're literally living in the aftermath of Donald Trump pulling us out the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Get out of here with that mess. Somebody will say it. I didn't want to say it, but Del Kearney said it. All right. Let's talk about a couple other things, and I'm going to do at least 15 more minutes, and I'm going to let you go. Before I move off the debate, great job, Coach. I mean, they had you at the first half. JD Vance had you on the ropes in the first half. And I saw as we went to one commercial break, Coach was mad. He was like, "Ugh." And I think he understood the gravity of the situation, but he composed himself. He got in the pocket. He looked for his moments, and he ran that 2-minute drill. And he came back, and honestly, he won. Why do I say he won? Not because he scored the most on the judge's scorecard. No, but because when it counted the most, he threw a haymaker, 2 or 3 haymakers back to back to back. And that's all we're going to remember of tonight. That's all that's going to be played tomorrow. I guarantee you all that you're going to see tomorrow is this.
He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it.
That's all we're going to talk about tomorrow. That's all we're going to talk about tomorrow. You know why? Because it's the big lie. And it's the big lie, but Tim Walz delivered that. I was over here. I was like, Coach, I don't. Tim Walz is a Christian. I know my prayers were being felt. I was like, Coach, ask him if he believed Donald Trump lost the election. Ask him. And then finally he asked him because he could not. We knew JD Vance could not tell the truth in that moment. That's all I could talk about in terms of the horse race. There's so many issues that are happening around us. The world is on fire, and it's hard to talk about politics from a horse race perspective, right? Because the decisions that are made, they do have ramifications for generations. I said a lot about Donald Trump's decision to pull us out of the JCPOA, but if I'm going to keep it 100, we are where we are right now because of George W. Bush and the decision he made to go into Iraq. Iraq was the #1 buffer for Iran. If we had not, Saddam Hussein being the monster that he was, I don't want anybody to mistake me here, but I want you to hear me very clearly. Had we not destabilized Iraq, they would continue to this day have been a buffer for Iran. And so some 20 years later, we're still living in the aftermath of the decisions made by George W. Bush. We're living in the world that's framed by these people who hold these positions of power. And it has become a means to an end itself. This power has become a means to an end itself. And that's how we got to this era of misinformation. This era of misinformation where the people crave the lies. Like that individual in the chat room who said Trump isn't in office. Well, yeah, no kidding. But we're living in those ramifications. But what's so important to understand is that there is a percentage of Americans who demand the misinformation. They cherish the lies that JD Vance told tonight. They cherish the lies that Donald Trump tells. They cherish the fact that Donald Trump can literally say anything, as incoherent and rambling and buffoonish as he is. They cherish the fact that he can get away with that and no one ever holds him accountable. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris will give an interview, and if she doesn't answer at the level of a Nobel-winning, award-winning economist, they will tear her apart. They need that asymmetrical imbalance. They need for Kamala Harris to have to be 30 times better than Donald Trump. Because if we were living in a real meritocracy, Donald Trump would be polling at 10%. If we lived in a real meritocracy, Donald Trump would never have been president of the United States to begin with. There's not a person on this planet who can honestly say in their heart that Donald Trump is an intelligent man, that Donald Trump is a presidential type individual, that he's presidential. There's no one who can say that they honestly trust his judgment. And if you do, you're probably someone who bought DJT stock. If you are a person who honestly trusts Donald Trump's judgment, you're probably a person who paid $100,000 for that watch and you weren't trying to launder money. You honestly thought it was a good watch. If we did not live in this upside down world, we honestly could actually progress. But because there are people who demand power and they understand that the truth betrays their opportunity for power, objective reality betrays their ability to obtain and maintain power. Democracy itself betrays their ability to obtain and maintain power. And so what do they say now? Get rid of democracy. And they have a most effective, efficient communicator in JD Vance. Oh my goodness, JD Vance, you are a monster, my guy. I sat there and watched you. I'm like, I wonder if I could take this guy. I could, but I'm not on stage. He is a most prolific liar and communicator. And he is soulless. He shifted from calling Donald Trump America's Hitler to saying to, oh my goodness, I got to remind myself I'm a pastor now. I have to stop myself before I use vulgar terminology. But he's prostrating himself before Donald Trump's prostate. That's as nice as I can say it. JD Vance has gone from knowing the true danger that Donald Trump is to being the handmaiden for Donald Trump, because JD Vance does not have a soul. He is a soulless, empty suit, willing to do anything he can to get power. So this MAGA misinformation machine, they're ready to get rid of Donald Trump because he's a moron. COVID-19 has blasted away the remaining neurons that were firing in Donald Trump's brain. He was already shortcoming in terms of his intelligence, but now he just can't string together a coherent sentence to save his life. But they have JD Vance, and JD Vance doesn't have any morals. He has no integrity, and he's willing to say and do anything he can for power. And so now we are faced with a real serious threat. We're faced with the threat of an efficient Donald Trump, JD Vance, a prolific Donald Trump, JD Vance, an intelligent version of Donald Trump, JD Vance. And what's more, JD Vance is subservient to money and power because he doesn't come from money and power. Donald Trump carried the ego of really thinking he was better than everybody, even other billionaires. Not JD Vance. JD Vance needs that money. JD Vance needs the money of Peter Thiel. He needs the money of Elon Musk. He admires it. And so now you have an empty suit who's willing to betray his own beliefs, willing to betray his own community, willing to betray his own sense of morality, if he even had such. And he's willing to do so for the pat on the head from the richest people in the world. Folks, we're in danger. I love politics from a horse race perspective, but we are just in too dangerous of a world to leave it there. I have oodles of commentary over what's happening in the Middle East, Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Iran. I'm going to get to that. The immediate, clear, and present threat to America, and I say this not dismissing what's happening in the Middle East. I say that to say if we don't arrest the threat that is here right now, do you not believe JD Vance won't hold and execute every single part of Project 2025? Is there anyone under the delusion that if Donald Trump strokes out because he's had to have COVID at least 17 times by now over the last 5 years, especially because he doesn't believe it's real? I mean, just listen. Did you hear Donald Trump today? He does not have long. I pray he makes it to the election, because these Republicans who have come over to support Kamala, they probably will change their mind and go and support JD Vance if Donald Trump croaks. But Donald Trump is not going to make it through 4 years. JD Vance will be in power. And are we under any delusion that JD Vance won't execute with precision the overthrow of democracy? And if they do that, there's literally nothing that you and I will be able to do as leftists, as progressives, as people who care about genocide, people who care about occupation, people who care about the least of these in every nation, from Gaza to Congo to the Sudan to Ukraine. Do you think we will be in any position to do anything but, quite honestly, fend for ourselves and run for our lives from the death squads that are training in the woods with Proud Boys, with the 3%ers, with the Oath Keepers, Those people who heard Donald Trump last night say that or 2 days ago when he said, we need a day of violence, a real hard hour of violence. People who heard that and translated like the American first Nazis, those Nick Fuentes types, they looked at that and immediately translated it into a purge. Do you think that if these people get power, we are going to be able to do anything for anyone else on the face of this planet? Well, we can't do much for them right now, but we can speak out about it. You have conservatives who are actually trying to convince us that just being opposite of MAGA, not being MAGA, that there are people who are saying that we are threats because we don't support Donald Trump. We're threats because we're not Make America Great Again. We're threats because we're not Christian nationalists. I'm about to get out of here because tomorrow's coming and all of you have to do what you have to do. You have to work. But we must take this complex moment. I'm not talking about the issues in Palestine and Gaza as complex. That's straightforward. The complex moment is looking at the landscape in the American empire and asking ourselves, do we possibly stand a chance to accomplish anything? Right now, as it stands, I think most of us feel like throwing our hands up. But if we allow MAGA to get into power, the structural changes they have committed to making will irrevocably change this democracy into something where we don't even have the channels to have a chance anymore. The democratic channels to have the chance to make change. The ability, you see how silenced our voices are. You see how hard it is for our voices to be heard at this point. You see how difficult it is to actually stand a chance at the voting booth when a buffoon like Donald Trump is still polling at nearly 50% of the United States of America's voting populace. And we're talking about policies that are going to restructure the very notion of voting. I love covering the horse race politics, the scorecard, the swings, the swings and the misses. I love covering that. But folks, if there's anything you ever heard me on, you have to be able to carry the cognitive dissonance of this moment. I'll say this much, and I'll get in trouble on this. I'm not going to leave y'all totally hanging. I'm going to share you this truth. Check this out. I firmly believe that there is a foreign policy arm of the Democratic Party that is violently malevolent, that aligns with the same violently malevolent Republicans. We are seeing their desires carried out on the international stage right now. How do I believe that? Why do I believe that? How do I know that? Because there is nothing that happens in this empire on the foreign stage that we are not intricately connected to, involved in, and at the decision-making table. I'm speaking in vagaries because I'm doing that intentionally. I haven't decided how much I want to actually just say this. But if you read between the lines, you can read between the lines. What's happening on the world stage today is as much a choice, a foreign policy choice of a particular regime that's still in power. I happen to believe that there's an attempt to shift that regime. And one of the first ways we saw a shift in that regime was the Democratic Party, a faction of the Democratic Party, going to war with another faction of the Democratic Party and telling Joe Biden he needed to step down. Wasn't everything, wasn't huge, But it was a signal to say there's enough war going on in the Democratic Party such that we did not have to be saddled with a man who was going to just lose. I know there's a lot of people who like Joe Biden in this new audience I have, but I'm going to keep it 100 with you. We were going to lose. And part of me feels like if you look at the decisions that are being made, if you look at what's happening on the international stage, feels like that was the plan all along. And there is a faction that's attempting to say, hell no, we're not going to go quietly into that good night. We're not just going to stand by and let democracy fall into the hands of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. We're going to fight like hell, and they are fighting. Do I think this new faction, this Kamala Harris wing, is absolved of anything and everything? Or do I think that they're going to be perfect? Absolutely the hell not. But I like the fact that they're fighting. I like the fact that there is a distinction between the two factions. Now, how that plays out over the 4 years, if they happen to win, I haven't the slightest idea because we've been fooled before. But I would tell you the truth. The fact that the decisions that are being made, the policies that are playing out on the international stage, the fact that nothing was done to stop this conflict from erupting into a war between Iran and Israel is a blow to the Harris campaign. It is an October surprise given to Kamala Harris from Joe Biden. Anything more, I'll start sounding like Alex Jones to some of y'all. Good night. Don't let the bed bugs bite.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.